the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. From 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. My name is Jerome, and I am the Sane Environmentalist. Today is April 18th, 2018. Welcome to the show from Eugene, Oregon. Beautiful, cloudy Eugene, Oregon. It is, cloudy, a little cool this morning here, a little misty. This is all good. I enjoy it. And life here seems very good and unpolluted, uncontaminated, and good. And I guess that's good. So today, I guess first of all, I'm going to be starting with the shout-outs. You know, I want to give a shout-out to, of course, Jules and UCY.TV. Great organization, folks. Please go to the homepage, you know, for the, as Libby Halevi would say, for the price of a cup of coffee and a good tip to the barista, you can make a huge difference and help ensure that UCY.TV is able to continue on in the same way that we're able to do right now. It is unfortunate that there is a certain taboo with YouTube, which affects our ability to do things on UCY.TV radio, because Jules has to, re-upload to YouTube, and a lot of people actually get the content from YouTube. But YouTube, if the content is too edgy, then they give you strikes. If there's any hint of any copyrighted material in it, they'll give you a strike. It just goes on and on. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So at any rate, let us support this free and open forum of ideas. So go to the homepage, ucy.tv, and click on the donate button. As well, I'd like to give a shout out to my co-host, Lonnie Clark, who has made this radio program what it is. It's her guidance and inspiration that has allowed the Age of Fission radio to become what it is. So shout out to you, Lonnie. Seriously. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to Libby Halevi. She is a tireless worker in the nuclear world and against nuclear. And it's it's kind of sad how much she has to go through and how little that she gets back in the form of any sort of resources or value for her work. So I encourage you all to go to nuclearhotseat.com and click the big red donate button. So today's show, I'm going to talk about something that I've been learning more about recently. I'm going to call it the United States government, nuclear poisoning, and human experimentation. The government of the United States and the other governments around the world, when it comes to nuclear energy and nuclear in general, all became very evil. And they discovered this radiation, and they discovered fission and fusion, and it can explode and make things go away. But they didn't really understand what were the implications to normal people living away from, for instance, the sites that might end up inhaling fallout. And so in order to kind of get an understanding of that, you'll see the 1950s propaganda films showing them prepping animals for testing, and you think, yeah, that's where we got our data from on the effects of radiation on the human body. But it isn't. A lot of that data came from unethical human radiation experiments. There is a Wikipedia page, and it is called Unethical Human Experimentation in the United States. It covers chemical, it covers what do they call it? Biological, and it covers radiation. So they have experimented on us for years and years and years, mostly without our understanding or consent. Imagine, if you will, if you had a stomach tumor and you went to the hospital and they did a biopsy and realized that, it's not a tumor. It's not going to kill you. You can take care of it and it'll heal up. But they don't tell you that. And instead of that, they tell you that they have to do a radical procedure to remove half of your digestive system. And then they trick you and they inject you with plutonium. And they don't tell you a thing, ever, or your family, ever. Until 40 years later it comes out that, that's what we did, yeah. This individual and his family were under the impression that the medical facilities saved his life by removing this massive amount of cancerous growth, when in actuality it was a small tumor that was benign. It wasn't even real cancer. So this happens on a regular guy just going in to take care of his stuff. So I'm going to read from this Wikipedia article with commentary. So the article section is called Human Radiation Experiments. Researchers in the United States have performed thousands of human radiation experiments to determine the effects of atomic radiation and radioactive contamination on the human body. Generally, on people who are poor, sick, or powerless. Most of these tests were performed, funded, or supervised by the United States military, the Atomic Energy Commission, or various other U.S. federal government agencies. The experiments included a wide array of studies involving things like feeding radioactive food to mentally disabled children or conscientious objectors, inserting radium rods into the noses of school children, deliberately releasing radioactive chemicals over U.S. and Canadian cities, and measuring the health effects of radioactive fallout from nuclear bomb tests, injecting pregnant women and babies with radioactive chemicals and irradiating the testicles of prison inmates, amongst other things. Much information about these programs was classified and kept secret. In 1986, the United States House Committee on Energy and Commerce released a report entitled, and this is the title of the report, American Nuclear Guinea Pigs, 3 Decades of Radiation Experiments on U.S. Citizens. In the 1990s, Eileen Wilson's reports on radiation testing for the Albuquerque Tribune prompted the creation of the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments by executive order of President Bill Clinton to monitor government tests. It published results in 1995. Wilson wrote a book called The Plutonium Files, and I recommend you read that book. In 1949, there was an iodine experiment called the Green Run. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission released iodine-131 and xenon-133 into the atmosphere near the Hanford site in Washington. This iodine contaminated a 500,000-acre, that's 2,000 square kilometers, area containing 3 small towns. In 1953, the Atomic Energy Commission ran several studies at the University of Iowa on the health effects of radioactive iodine in newborns and pregnant women. In one study, researchers gave pregnant women from 100 to 200 microcuries of iodine-131 in order to study the woman's aborted embryos in an attempt to discover at what stage and to what extent radioactive iodine crosses the placental barrier. That is horrifying to me. That is wow. They gave pregnant women enough iodine to kill the fetuses, and then took apart the aborted fetuses to see exactly how the radiation had affected them and at what stage in development radiation crosses the placental barrier. That is eugenics or something. It's how could somebody do that? How could a human do that to another human? How is that really, except for the volume of incidences, any different from sticking somebody in a gas chamber and injecting them with deadly gas to kill them? That, in fact, might be preferable to some people. Then you're just dead instead of you suffering for years and years from cancers and other related diseases. Wow. In another study, they gave 25 newborn babies who were under 36 hours old and weighed from 5.5 to 8.5 pounds iodine-131, either by oral administration or through an injection, so that they could measure the amount of iodine in their thyroid glands, as they knew that the radioactive iodine would go to that gland. In another AEC study, researchers at the University of Nebraska College for Medicine fed iodine-131 to 28 healthy infants through a gastric tube to test the concentration of iodine in the infant's thyroid glands. I would love you to show me a parent who would let their newborn baby be injected with radioactive iodine just to see how fast their thyroid gland would absorb it. In 1953, the Atomic Energy Commission sponsored a study to discover if radioactive iodine affected premature babies differentially from full-term babies. In the experiment, researchers from Harper Hospital in Detroit orally administered iodine-131 to 65 premature and full-term infants who weighed from 2.1 to 5.5 pounds. From 1955 to 1960, Sonoma State Hospital in Northern California served as a permanent drop-off location for mentally handicapped children diagnosed with cerebral palsy or lesser disorders. The children subsequently underwent painful experimentation without adult consent. Many were given spinal taps for which they received no direct benefit. Reporters of 60 Minutes learned that in those 5 years, the brain of every child with cerebral palsy who died at Sonoma State was removed and studied without parental consent. According to the CBS story, over 1,400 patients died at the clinic. In an experiment in the 1960s, over 100 Alaskan citizens were continually exposed to radioactive iodine. In 1962, the Hanford site again released iodine-135, stationing test subjects along its path to record its effects on them. The AEC also recruited Hanford volunteers to ingest milk contaminated with 131 during this time. Uranium experiments. Between 1946 and 47, researchers at the University of Rochester injected uranium-234 and uranium-235 in dosages ranging from 6.4 to 70.7 micrograms per kilo into 6 people to study how much uranium their kidneys could tolerate before becoming damaged. Between 1953 and 1957, at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. William Sweet injected 11 terminally ill, comatose, and semi-comatose patients with uranium in an experiment to determine, among other things, its viability as a chemotherapy treatment against brain tumors, which all but one of the patients had, one being a misdiagnosis. Dr. Sweet, who died in 2001, maintained that consent had been obtained from the patients and next of kin. Plutonium experiments. From April 10, 1945 to July 18, 1947, 18 people were injected with plutonium as part of the Manhattan Project. Dose administrations ranged from 95 to 5,900 nanocuries. Albert Stevens, and this is the guy I was telling you about a little earlier, a man misdiagnosed with stomach cancer, received treatment, quote-unquote, for his cancer, quote-unquote, at the UC San Francisco Medical Center in 1945. Dr. Joseph Gilbert Hamilton, a Manhattan Project director, in charge of human experiments in California, had Stevens injected with P-238 and plutonium-239 without informed consent. Stevens never had cancer. A surgery to remove cancerous cells was highly successful in removing the benign tumor. He lived for another 20 years with the injected plutonium. Since Stevens received the highly radioactive P-238, his accumulated dose over his remaining life was higher than anyone had ever received, 64 sieverts, full body load. Neither Albert Stevens nor any of his relatives were told that he never had cancer. They were led to believe that the experimental treatment, quote-unquote, had worked for human radiobiology in 1975 without the consent, had worked. His cremated remains were surreptitiously acquired by the Argonne National Laboratory. The ashes were transferred to the National Human Radiobiology Tissue Repository at the Washington State University, which keeps the remains of people who died having radioisotopes in their bodies. 3 patients at Billings Hospital at the University of Chicago were injected with plutonium in 1946. 6 employees of a Chicago metallurgical lab were given water, which was contaminated with plutonium-239, so that researchers could study how plutonium is absorbed into the digestive tract. An 18-year-old woman in an upstate New York hospital expected to be treated for a pituitary gland disorder was instead injected with plutonium. Other experiments involving radioactive materials. Immediately after World War II, researchers at Vanderbilt University gave 829 pregnant mothers in Tennessee what they were told were, quote-unquote, vitamin drinks that would improve the health of their babies. The mixtures contained radioactive iron, and the researchers were determining how fast the radioisotope crossed into the placenta. At least 3 of these children are known to have died from the experiments from the cancers and leukemia. 4 of the women's babies died from cancer as a result of the experiments, and the women experienced rashes, bruises, anemia, hair loss, tooth loss, and cancer. From 1946 to 1953 at the Walter E. Fernald State School in Massachusetts, in an experiment sponsored, of course, by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, and, this is a shocker, the Quaker Oats Corporation. Think about that. Quaker Oats, how much more fundamentally American and healthy and honest can you think of? Quaker Oats. Quaker Oats work together with the United States government in order to feed radioactive oatmeal containing radioactive calcium and other isotopes to disabled children in order to track how nutrients are digested. The children were not told that they were being fed radioactive chemicals. They were told by hospital staff and researchers that they were joining a quote-unquote science club. The University of California Hospital in San Francisco exposed 29 patients, some with rheumatoid arthritis, to a total body irradiation of 100 to 300 rads to obtain data for military. That's a huge amount of radiation. In the 1950s, researchers at the Medical College of Virginia performed experiments on severe burn victims, most of them poor and black, without their knowledge or consent, with funding from the Army, and in collaboration with the Atomic Energy Commission. In the experiments, the subjects were exposed to additional burning, experimental antibiotic treatment, and injections of radioactive isotopes. The amount of radioactive phosphorus-32 injected into some of the patients was 500 microcuries, 19 megabecquerels. It was 50 times the acceptable dose for a healthy individual. For people with severe burns, this likely led to significantly increased death rates. Think about it. Severe burn victim. And to treat this burn, they put them under an x-ray machine or something and dose them. And then inject them with radioactive phosphorus. Man, I guess it didn't pay to be poor and black and burned in the 1950s, did it? Poor people. Jesus God. Between 1948 and 1954, funded by the federal government, researchers at the Johns Hopkins Hospital inserted radium rods into the noses of 582 Baltimore, Maryland school children as an alternative to adeniodectomy, which is the removal of a small pad of skin below the sinuses and above the, what do you call those, tonsils. They were removing that for some reason. So they stuck a radium rod in their noses to kill the tissue, I guess. Similar experiments were performed on over 7,000 U.S. Army and Navy personnel during World War II. Nasal radium irradiation, that's what they called it, became a standard medical treatment that was used in over 2.5 million Americans. In another study at the Walter E. Fernald State School in 1956, researchers gave mentally disabled children radioactive calcium orally and intravenously. They also injected radioactive chemicals into malnourished babies. And I'm not going to read this next part because it's just too horrifying. But it has to do with brains, skulls, spinal fluid, and big needles. In 1961 and 1962, 10 Utah State prison inmates had blood samples taken, which were then mixed with radioactive chemicals and re-injected back into their bodies. The Atomic Energy Commission, funded by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, administered radium-224 and thorium-234 to 20 people between 1961 and 1965. Many were chosen from the Age Center of New England and had volunteered for a research project on aging. Doses were 0.2 to 2 for radium and 1.2 to 120 microcuries for thorium. In a 1967 study published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, pregnant women were injected with radioactive cortisol to see if it would cross the placental barrier and affect the fetuses. Fallout research. In 1957, atmospheric nuclear explosions in Nevada, which were part of Operation Plum Bob, were later determined to have released enough radiation to cause from 11,000 to 212,000 excess cases of thyroid cancer among U.S. citizens who were exposed to the fallout from the explosion, leading to between 1,000 and 21,000 deaths. Early in the Cold War, in studies known as Project Gabriel and Project, here's a good one, Sunshine, researchers in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia tried to determine how much nuclear fallout would be required to make the Earth uninhabitable. They realized that atmospheric nuclear testing had provided them an opportunity to investigate this. Such tests had dispersed radioactive contamination worldwide. An examination of human bodies could reveal how readily it was taken up, and hence how much damage it caused. Of particular interest was strontium-90 in the bones. Infants were primarily the focus of this, as they would have a full opportunity to absorb the new contaminants. As a result of this conclusion, researchers began a program to collect human bodies and bones from all over the world with a particular focus on infants. The bones were cremated and the ashes analyzed for radioisotopes. This project was kept secret primarily because it would be a public relations disaster, you think? And as a result, parents and family were not told what was being done with the body parts of their relatives. Irradiation experiments. Between 1960 and 1971, the Department of Defense funded non-consensual whole-body radiation experiments on poor black cancer patients who were not told what was being done to them. Patients were told that they would be receiving a treatment that might cure their cancer, but the Pentagon was trying to determine the effects of high-level radiation on the human body. One of the doctors involved in the experiments, Robert Stone, was worried about litigation by his patients. He referred to them only as by their initials in the medical reports. He did this so that, in his words, there will be no means by which the patients can ever connect themselves up with the report, in order to prevent either adverse publicity or litigation. From 1960 to 1971, Dr. Eugene Sanger, funded by the Defense Atomic Support Agency, performed whole-body irradiation experiments on more than 90 poor black advanced-stage cancer patients with inoperable tumors at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center during the quote-unquote Cincinnati radiation experiment. He forged consent forms and did not inform the patients of the risk of irradiation. The patients were given 100 or more rads, that's a 1 gray unit, of whole-body radiation, which in many cases caused immediate and intense pain and vomiting. Critics have questioned the medical rationale for this study and contend that the main purpose of the research was to study the acute effects of radiation exposure. From 1963 to 1973, a leading endocrinologist, Dr. Carl Heller, irradiated the testicles of Oregon and Washington prisoners. In return for their participation, he gave them $5 a month and $100 when they had to receive a vasectomy upon conclusion of the trial. The surgeon who sterilized the men said that it was necessary to, quote-unquote, keep them from contaminating the general population with radiation-induced mutants. Dr. Joseph Hamilton, one of the researchers who had worked with Heller on the experiments, said that the experiments had a little of the Buchenwald touch, and I'm not really sure what that means. In 1963, the University of Washington did research which irradiated the testicles of 232 prisoners in order to determine the effects of radiation on testicular function. When these inmates later left prison and had children, at least 4 of them had offspring born with birth defects. The exact number is unknown because researchers never followed up on the status of the subjects. So that is almost unbelievable. It's almost unbelievable to me. You know, if I wasn't able to go into each of these incidents and look up and see a lot of times the original documents, you know, that were generated as part of these projects, you know, and they figured out exactly what radiation does to the human body. And they did it by subjecting we the people to what I could only call horrifying experiments. You know, so once again, if you're poor and black in the United States, try not to get sick and go to the doctor because you never know what they're going to do. I mean, that's, to me, I'm almost unbelievable. It is unbelievable. I can't wrap my brain around the fact that the Department of Energy and the it's the NRC now, but the Nuclear Energy Commission, you know, tasked with keeping the world safe, tasked with providing clean, green energy, was in fact experimenting on the very people, the very innocent people that they were claiming to protect. You know, you hear about the Cold War Nazi medical experiments, and yeah, they were absolutely horrifying. Or not the Cold War, the World War II, when they were experimenting on people, the Nazis were. You know, and those people went to trial and as war criminals, and many of them, I think, probably were executed or imprisoned for the rest of their lives. What happened to the people who took people who already were burned, severely burned, and then stuck them under a device which radiated their skin and created worse burns than already existed? Imagine having a really bad burn and then having somebody burn you in that same spot again just to see what would happen. Imagine the mindset of an individual who is more concerned about bad publicity than the health and safety and comfort of his patients. And so it goes contrary to the whole oath that a physician, do no harm. First, do no harm. And then at the end, it's trying to go get out of it by saying, well, they consented. But then you go find the consent forms and you realize, oh, these are all forged. These in the 1940s, a lot of these poor black people, especially inmates and stuff, they didn't have the ability to write and sign their name and all that. That was a different world. We don't realize how far we've come with racial equality in the United States in the last 50 years, 60, 70 years. We don't even have a concept of how it used to be, when it was just a normal thing for black people to sit in the back or not drink at this fountain, or it was just part of our consciousness. It was part of our culture. And that apparently carried over if you were poor or disadvantaged, crippled, handicapped, black. There is a good chance that you're going to get zapped or injected or experimented on by our government in order to keep the rest of us safe, I guess. So is that the justification? We need to find out exactly what will happen if everybody gets irradiated, because, well, that's what we're planning to do. The whole nuclear war, the whole nuclear bomb thing, the whole nuclear thing is all about death. It started with the idea of death. It's not like they figured out a nuclear pile and we're like, holy mackerel, look at that. We can make clean green energy with this. And that's not what they were thinking. They were thinking, holy mackerel, that really blew up. We could blow somebody up with this. America, make America number one. We're number one. We have the ability to kill everybody on the planet quicker than anybody else, which is exactly what would happen if there is ever a full-blown nuclear conflict. And I think that maybe the government realizes that. Maybe the government realizes there's no such thing as a limited nuclear war. There's no such thing as a nuclear war just like the one we had, or the little missile shooting match that we had in Syria with the United States, and I think it was France and Britain, which was very quick, easy, painless for the rest of us. We didn't even hear the missiles. We didn't see the flashes. And it doesn't matter, because there's nothing that will happen to us from that. But if those flashes were nuclear, okay, that would be very different. The nuclear weapon has the unique ability to destroy life, not only on the genetic level, but on the physical level as well. It has the unique ability to literally make the planet uninhabitable for a very long time. I'm amazed that we're still doing as well as we are, given how many nuclear devices we've detonated on our planet. We literally detonated hundreds of nuclear warheads in the development and research process of this. So there's tons of that out there already. All those elements they're still out there from the fissioning process. The uranium is there, the plutonium is there, most of the cesium is still there, strontium-90 is still there. It's all there. Every speck. Some of it's decayed, but if you look at the decay chart of the nuclides, you will discover that plutonium doesn't turn into some mundane thing as soon as it degrades. It turns into another nasty thing, which lasts even longer than it does, just with slightly lower radiation levels. So this is really what we're looking forward to, what we're moving towards in an active way, humanity, is our own utter self-destruction and the destruction of the biosphere as well. You know, I've decided to quit calling Earth an ecosystem. I think it's a biosphere. I think that because a system has an openness about it, an open-ended thing, you know, whereas a biosphere is something very close. It's a sphere. It's an enclosed system, a loop. And if you break the loop, then the whole system fails. And it can break in so many different ways on down the line. And so as we madly push towards the breaking point, not only with nuclear pollution, but also climactically and with other chemical things and just generally our attitude as a species, you know, we're once again, it's the lemming thing. We're all pummeling, running towards the edge of the cliff. You know, and the edge of the cliff may represent a bright flash. You know, bright flash, white light. Next thing you know, you're dead. It happens that quick. You know, I was amazed when I heard about the alert. They say it's not a drill in Hawaii. You remember that last month or 2 months or 3 months ago? They had a live nuclear Armageddon alert went out over the emergency broadcast system, and it said, this is not a drill. There are multiple incoming nuclear warheads. Get to a place of safety, as if you could get to a place of safety. You can't. And so basically, everybody on that island who heard that message, in their mind, realized, well, I guess this is it then. And ironically and sadly, people were very calm about it. They were just like, well, all right, I guess I don't know what can you do? I guess we're all going to die here in a minute. There was no mass hysteria. There was no rioting in the streets. It was very calm. You know, they were ready to go down. Or as ready as you can get to go down. So are we as a species just ready to accept this? Is that what it is? Do we realize that it is so completely out of our control that there's literally nothing we could ever do about it? So we just have to accept it as part of the reality, as the paradigm of our existence? I think that's what it is. I do. I think that humanity has awoken to the fact that we are dooming the planet. And I think humanity has come to the realization and the conclusion that it will be very, 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 very difficult, if not impossible, to fix that. And so as a result, I really believe that humanity, for its own good, for the lack of any better way to put it, realizes that it's on the way out. Individually, we're not thinking that way. Individually, we're thinking how long our lives are going to be, and if we have children, how long their lives are going to be, and our grandchildren, and, you know, great-grandchildren, or great-great-great-great-grandchildren. You know, and it may not be that way. It really may not. So I say, do not go quietly, humanity. I say, there's enough of us that do see the beauty of life and do see the hope in the universe and do see the fact that we can, if we really want to, correct this. We can. You know, they're saying, oh, there's no way that you could store this waste for long term. What they mean by that is we're not willing to go through the hard work and effort and spend the money to make something that will contain that waste for that long of a time. There isn't a collective will to do anything. Therefore, nothing will be done. You know, that's why we have the half-inch thick stainless steel canisters of irradiated nuclear fuel, okay? Nuclear fuel has two states, three really. First state is your uranium fuel rods, okay, which are alpha emitters, but they're not emitting any gamma or neutron radiation really. So there, you could walk right up to a fuel bundle and look at it if it had not been irradiated yet. But once it's become irradiated, now it's a different thing. It literally transforms. It turns from one thing into another, and then it becomes deadly radioactive. And then the final stage is they grind that up, extract the plutonium, turn it into nuclear triggers for our hydrogen bombs, because we don't have atomic bombs anymore. They're all hydrogen. You know, the smallest yield you're going to get, it might be difficult for them to get something as small as Hiroshima or Nagasaki at this point. You know, we're looking at the average blast radius of about 5 miles, i.e. everything incinerated in a circle of 5 miles from the center point. Think about your city and where you are right now, and get a piece of string 5 miles long and draw a big circle around it. And think of how much is there, how many people are there, how much nature is there, and how that would all be literally incinerated, you know, in the event of a megaton nuclear explosion. So it's not like we need to wake up, folks. This is critical. It's critical. And that's why I keep going on about it. That's why I do the Age of Fission radio show. Because I believe in humanity. I do. I truly believe that we possess the potential to be the Star Treks that we see on TV. The noble, beautiful, brilliant humans who go about the universe helping other species and doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Understanding the prime directive and understanding that we have a power within ourselves to do great damage if we're not very careful and considerate in what we're doing. You know, I think that's what the prime directive of Star Trek is all about. You know, it's basically saying that we can't allow our darkness to infect other species of life. That all life is precious. Even if we don't understand it, we still don't have a right to affect how its natural development. You know, and for humanity, our natural development would take us off of this planet. There's no doubt in my mind. Earth would be, in the event that our wisdom did keep up with our knowledge, okay, in that event, then our ability and our technology would allow us to do wonderful, miraculous things. You know, our big brains would allow us to have the wisdom to understand the implications of our technology and the moral right and wrong of it all. You know, and in a way, that's why I love watching that show. I love watching Star Trek because they challenge the conventions of society and saying, well, just because we do it and we think it's great and wonderful, that means you should too. You know, and actually, it reminds me of an episode on Voyager, wherein the crew is in another quadrant of the galaxy. They get thrown there by mistake, and they're trying to get home, and they run across an old space probe, which was launched like 200 or 300 years prior, right at the beginning of quote-unquote the warp era, where they learned to warp time-space to go fast and far. So this probe, they got the signal from the probe, and they found the probe on this planet, and the planet is devastated. Its atmosphere is unbreathable. It is polluted with all different kinds of radiation. So they're like, well, what the heck is that? And so they go down to retrieve the probe, the computer out of the probe, and they find fields of missile silos. And they look inside the silos, and all the missiles are still there and intact, yet the entire planet is wiped out. And they're like, well, it was probably some sort of, what kind of warheads? Oh, they're antimatter warheads. Oh, gosh, guess what? Our probe. The probe we sent out. Peace to all of you. Here's a beautiful, wonderful free energy source. Guess what? They turned it into a weapon. And the more they investigated, they realized that it wasn't a nuclear war. It wasn't an antimatter war. What it was is they used that same thing for their power systems. And they had a vigorous, beautiful society. And then they had an accident, and boom. Their poison power literally killed their planet. You know, so despite our best intentions, you know, that is an example of our wisdom not keeping pace with our technology. Pre-prime directive, where it's like we need to spread and share this with everybody. Yeah, it's dangerous, but they'll figure it out. I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. You know, we are so wonderful. The human species is a unique, wonderful thing. You know, we're gifted with, I don't know why or how, but we're different from every other species on this planet. We're different. We're magical. We're special. And we have both the power for beautiful creation as well as hideous destruction. And we need to really get our minds right and figure out what it is we're going to be. Are we going to be beautifully creative, or are we going to be hideously destructive? Because you can't be part of each. You know, and the history will show that some of the art of the Third Reich was indeed beautiful. Some of the art that the people did that were part of that is beautiful. But you know what? Nobody wants it because it was created by a hideous, evil movement. You know, there'll be some quirky collectors that want it, but not really. Pretty much, nobody's looking for Nazi propaganda memorials and Nazi anything. They don't want to collect it. We want to, as a species, we want to move on from that. We don't want to have to look at that. You know, how many millions of Jews and other poor, unfortunate people were literally destroyed. You know, and how many of them were experimented on medically, and probably not with radiation, but maybe. I don't know that they had radiation in Germany at that point, radioactive stuff. I don't think they did, or otherwise Hitler would have, he would have employed that even as a dirty bomb, because that's the way he would have, give that guy an ability to destroy human DNA at the very base of it. We don't want that. So a good thing he didn't get that. He was close. It was his guys, you know. It was those people. Einstein is German, you know. Those guys were the ones thinking that stuff up, or were given the information that allowed them to act like they thought it up. Because I still have issues with that, with the whole idea that somehow humanity just came up with fusioning technology. Somehow we just figured that out. We went from, 1930s, 40s, just starting to be able to really refine oil and do things with oil and make plastics, to splitting an atom, just like that. You know, I think that we had some help there. And you know what? What if the story of humanity is no different from the story that I told a few minutes ago about that planet? What if nuclear fissioning technology came to us from outside of our system? What if somehow we found a probe, kept it secret, but the probe had the instructions, just like the Star Trek probe had the instructions on how to create antimatter and how to harness antimatter. it obviously did not have a safety manual. And I think we may be in the same position, that this information came from outside the system, and we don't have the wisdom to harness it correctly. And so what we're doing is we're turning it into a weapon and an energy system. And in the process of that, we are destroying our environment. Don't think that all the fuel bundles, the irradiated fuel bundles that they haven't ground up, aren't right there. All the ones at San Onofre power plant, sitting literally at sea level, like 50 feet or 100 feet from the high tide line, in a half-inch thick stainless steel cask, which is not inspectable, which is not removable. They don't know how they could move them, so they put the fuel rods in these thin casks, and then they stick the cask in a concrete mausoleum, and that's that. Is it airtight and watertight? No, it has to be able to vent because the rods are hot. If you let them get too hot, then they'll start to melt here and there. So, and as soon as they melt, then the really nasties get out. Once you break that zirconium wrapper, then that's when the really, really nasties get out. But even before that, you've got enough decay going on to where you've got neutron energy, you've got gamma rays, you've got nasty radiation, as well as plenty of alpha and beta. But if you break that cladding, then all of a sudden the strontium and the cesium get out, okay? And that's really bad. So, gosh, I really wish I could go in a hopeful direction here, folks. I really wish that I could talk about things that are sane. I call myself the sane environmentalist, but I have to wonder. I really have to wonder sometimes. How sane is what I'm reporting on? How sane is what we're doing? And the insanity is, and this is a typical thing for people in the activist community. And if you are a part of the activist community, take hope from this. We do what we do, of course, with the hopes of creating change. We do what we do, of course, to try to make things better, not only for ourselves, but for future generations of people coming down the line. And it seems that at every turn, we are being thwarted by the mega powers that exist. And those include the government and the oligarchy, the power companies, General Electric, Quaker Oats. Quaker Oats was in on feeding radioactive oatmeal to disabled children. Think about that next time that you go to the store to buy oatmeal. You might want to not buy Quaker oatmeal or any Quaker products. I'm stunned by that. That one of the most feel-good American oatmeal is just like one of those American staples, And the people that make the oatmeal are just good because they're making a staple. And oats are completely harmless. There, we're told, but that wasn't the case with those poor children. Nobody ever, you could probably find out what happened to them, but I don't think they kept good records. A lot of them died.